So I think it's useful to go back and consider the position that Bishop Doerflinger seems to be advocating in a slightly more concrete way. So when we look at this quote, the first quote I pulled from page 160, where he argues, in short, an unqualified pro-choice defensive assisted suicide lacks coherence because corpses have no choices. The suggestion here is that one has an obligation to preserve one's life that supersedes any other possible obligation or desire that one might have. And the response that I tried to suggest here was that having a right to life doesn't seem to entail that you have that obligation towards your life, and that it might be perfectly rational for you to make a choice in some situations where you know that that choice will prevent you from making other choices. But in that situation, you realize that any other choices that you make are utterly without meaning. They will have no impact on your life, the quality of your life, and so on. So let's take a cue from Rachel's and imagine how this would supposedly unfold in the case of that cancer patient, Jack. So we imagine ourselves as this cancer patient, Jack, who suffers from such extreme pain that pain medications, both the intravenous injections and the pills that are provided in between those intravenous injections, cannot obliterate the pain, so that inevitably, night after night, the pain becomes so horrible that you start whimpering and eventually howling, maybe writhing, that you know that there is no choice that you can make that is going to ameliorate that awful agony. There is no choice that you can make that is going to mitigate or change your future outcome. You are going to die. You're going to die after suffering night after night of excruciating, unrelenting agony. And nothing about your life is going to facilitate making any kind of meaningful choices. Your only choice is going to be how long you can resist breaking down into whimpering and howling from the pain, how loud you howl, how desperately you beg for additional pain medications. These are the only sorts of choices that remain open to you, and they remain open to you only for a very finite time, and nothing you can do can change that. There is no possibility of pursuing happiness. Happiness is no longer an option for you. Now, that's a really bleak scenario, but it seems kind of consistent with the sort of story that we found in that Rachel's chapter. And if people are really in that kind of scenario, it seems morally wrong in my intuitive judgment. And I think we all need to sort of reflect on why we would think that somehow this was the morally correct action, that we are morally obliged to continue our life even in circumstances such as these. It seems like Bishop Doerflinger just cannot allow that equally American phrase of give me liberty or give me death. Never are you in a position where you could rationally and reasonably make a choice to say, look, I have a right to life, but I want to cede my right to life. I want to invade people to actually kill me because there is nothing about my life that gives it meaning, gives it value, gives it purpose. And so I find Bishop Doerflinger's arguments here kind of unconvincing. But at this point, he changes his tactics. He's been presenting arguments that he thinks people in favor of assisted suicide or active euthanasia might forward for that position, and his responses to them. But at this point, he turns his attention to a different strategy, a different tact. He now wants to talk about a list of loose cannons, 7 things, what he calls contingent factors in the contemporary situation, that, to quote him here from page 160, may make it virtually inevitable in practice, if not compelling at the level of abstract theory, that removal of the taboo against assisted suicide will lead to destructive expansions of the right to kill the innocent. So now he wants to argue, not sort of strictly speaking based on empirical evidence or experimental results, but on what he considers to be observations that are contingent on the way our society works right now. And he wants to argue that each of these contingent factors has the potential to result in a, as he terms it, destructive expansion of the right to kill the innocent. And ultimately, what he's going to want to argue is that since he can find 7 factors that have this potential to them, that any argument in favor of introducing even the most restricted class of cases where it's morally permissible or legal for one to have an assisted suicide, you're going to need to show that these contingent factors can never come into play, can never lead to the destructive expansion of the right to kill the innocent. So in the next segment of the lecture, we'll look at these 7 factors and talk about them, and ultimately his conclusion with regard to what he thinks they imply about the possibility of practical legislation in society that would allow for even a limited legal assisted suicide.